Ladies and gentlemen, this is a special episode. Why? Because it's the 50th anniversary of the release of Jaws, the movie, the trilogy, the thing that really changed shark science and how we see sharks in ways that we probably did not expect. Some people will say, hey, it made great white sharks look awful and people were scared. And yes, that is true. But it also funded a lot of research for sharks in general and probably got to us where we got to a place where we are today in terms of all those shark research and all the stuff we know about sharks. And we're going to be talking to a number of people, including Dave Ebert, of course, my co-host. We're also going to be talking to Lisa Natanson. We're going to be talking to Greg Skomal, and we're going to be talking to Chris Lowe. All have worked with great white sharks in their career. All are part of the Jaws generation that we've been talking about on this podcast for a long time. So let's start this show and let's talk about Jaws. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to an extremely exciting episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. I'm your co-host, Andrew Lewin, here with my co-host, Dr. David Ebert. And Dave is part of that Jaws generation. Dave, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks, man. It's kind of nice to be kind of a co-host / guest on the show.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
It's definitely, it's almost in a way like a high school reunion or something. Only the Jaws generation, because Chris and Greg and Lisa and I all kind of came up together starting in the 80s. And Lisa and I, as those of you who listen to the show, her and I were lab mates back at Moss Landing Marine Laboratories in the early 80s, literally started our careers together. And so it's kind of neat to kind of come full circle now and be talking about talking about Jaws at 50, which makes you feel really old. But but all of us had some kind of connection to the movie one way or another, and we talk about that in the episode, which is really cool. And I think I've mentioned a few episodes here and there, but actually Lisa and I's first paper was on the age and growth of the white shark back in 1985. And
that's insane to think about.
Yeah, it's amazing people think about it. And it came out of a conference we talk about that was at Cal State Fullerton in 1983, which was the first international global white shark conference. And those of you that listen, back in 2023, they had the fifth one, I think, 40 years later, which I didn't attain, but that Lisa and I were the first attended that one. That was our first publication. And looking at the list of people at the time that are there, it's like, pretty much we're the youngest that are there, or the only ones that are still like kind of active and haven't retired or died yet. So it's like,
well, that's good to know.
Yeah,
that's always nice to know, right?
Yeah.
But this is it's going to be a fun episode because not only do we talk about the research and how it's changed over the time and how Jaws affected that and influenced that, but also just like your first perceptions of the movie when you saw it in theaters and everybody else, and how they felt about it, and different feelings, including my own, which is a lot of fun just to get a little different generation there. And we've been posting up some videos of a younger generation and how Jaws affected them, which is always interesting to hear. So there's a lot of different perspectives. We talk a lot about some of the tidbits of Jaws and the filming that probably people didn't know. Chris Lowe obviously grew up in the area. He's talked about it on this podcast a number of times, where he actually saw like some of his friends and people that he knew in and around town that were in the movie, which he said, were a bunch of characters in themselves in their own rights, which is a lot of fun. So this is a fun episode talking about shark research, talking about shark science, the perception of sharks over the years, and some of the great conservation stories and success stories that we've seen over those years. So without further ado, here are David Ebert, Chris Lowe, Greg Skomal, Lisa Natanson, and myself talking about Jaws, the 50th anniversary. Enjoy the interview, and we'll talk to you after. All right, everybody, we have a special episode for you all today. It is the 50th anniversary of Jaws. So Dave and I decided, actually, this was Dave's idea, really. Dave said, hey, you know what? We need to get the Jaws generation on the podcast. We've talked about this a number of times. Let's get like 4 people, including Dave, who are who just grew up in this, having their career in this Jaws generation, and we're going to talk about the effect that Jaws had on the on their careers, and as well as shark research. We're going to talk about the shark research that they've done because of that, and where do we think sharks are in terms of where it was back in the 70s after Jaws, and now 50 years after Jaws. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of fun. We got some hot takes to go over. I'm looking forward to this. So Before we go further, let's just do a quick introduction. We'll start with Lisa. Why don't you just introduce yourself, who you are and what you do?
I'm Lisa Natanson, and I worked for over 30 years on shark life history, primarily agent growth and reproduction at NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service, and retired a few years ago, and I'm still working, but I'm not getting paid anymore, so that helps.
Good to hear. And Greg, you're next.
Greg Skomal. I'm a shark biologist for the state of Massachusetts, and I worked with Lisa many years ago. I actually still collaborate with Lisa and Chris and Dave. But yeah, I've been focused on great white sharks off New England recently, but I've done a lot of other stuff too.
Wonderful. And you've been on the podcast. Actually, everybody I think has been on the podcast more than once, including Chris. Chris, I want you to just remind people who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm Chris Lowe. I'm a professor of marine biology at Cal State Long Beach, and I'm the director of the Shark Lab. I grew up on Martha's Vineyard, and I started working with Greg right out of college.
Amazing.
Wow. We go way back. And I've known Dave since grad school.
Yeah.
Lisa, too.
Yeah. So.
And then, Dave, I know everybody knows who you are because you've been on the podcast. Why don't you just kind of remind people who you are?
Well, I'm Dave Ebert, and I'm program director for the Pacific Shark Research Center. And I actually started out with Lisa. We were in the same lab together in 1980-something, and when we started out. And so we've known each other a long time, and had a lot of fun experiences. And, I got to know Greg and Chris, all kind of from that same 80s era, kind of just post Jaws, and we're still at it and still going at it today, looking at sharks and everything. So
awesome. This is going to be fun. The first thing I want to do is kind of get an idea of where all of you were at, age-wise or career-wise when the first Jaws movie came out. Right. So, Lisa, we'll start with you. Where were you in your career when had you started your career? Were you a graduate student? Where were you in that time when Jaws came out? Was it 1975?
Yeah.
75, right?
I'm not quite old enough to have started my career at that point.
Okay. Sorry.
I was in high school. I had decided probably 10 years before that I was going to work on sharks. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. There was a lot of white shark attack stuff. I was a very gory child, so I kind of got into the whole attack scenario. So when Jaws came out, I was thrilled. And I went and saw it 5 times, which I don't usually see movies second time, no less 5, and just loved it. And it just kind of, I don't know that it spurned my career, but it was kind of nice to see Matt Hooper out doing what I had wanted to do forever. So that's kind of where I was. Greg
how about yourself?
His career.
Well, being a lot younger than Lisa, I was a young teenager, and I heard about this movie about sharks, and like most kids, I was fascinated by sharks. And then I saw the film at a theater in Connecticut where I was growing up, and I was completely fascinated by the film. I loved it. I thought it was incredible. Kind of scary, although the feature for me, like Lisa and probably Chris and Dave, was seeing Matt Hooper. And I decided at that time, he's got a hell of a cool job. And that became my goal, back in 1975 to say, see if I could become a shark biologist.
So that movie was like, no, this is what I want to do. Like once I found this, because you were always interested in the sea, right? I remember the first interview you talked about having marine aquariums and all that kind of stuff. Were you already at that point?
Yeah, as I talk about in my book, Chasing Shadows, available on Amazon and all major book outlets.
Nice plug.
Nice.
I kept fish in aquariums. I was fascinated by the ocean. And so,
Gotcha.
And I loved sharks, but Matt Hooper, told me that, boy, there's a job like this. I'd love to do
it. And Chris, how about yourself?
Well,
you have a little bit more special, a more intimate journey.
A little bit. I because I grew up on the island, I was there when they filmed it, and a lot of the kids that I went to school with were in it. Cool. So I definitely did not have the looks to get in the movie, and we're close. I couldn't even be an extra. But I remember filming, and I was interested in sharks before, And I was probably 11 when it came out. And I remember going to the Island Theater in Vineyard Haven and seeing it. It had just been out. And it was amazing. I kind of laughed. I thought the scary parts were kind of funny. But that was because we watched it being made. So we saw the mechanical shark, you saw all those things, and you thought, well, this is kind of fake, right?
Yeah.
But I can imagine somebody who didn't see that would go, oh my God, this is horrible. So I think as a kid growing up there and seeing all that was, kind of made it not real for me.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it happened in a fictitious place.
Of course.
So that made it easier. But the cool thing for me is watching Jaws is like watching home movies. Because there were so many locals in that film that I grew up with. My baseball coach was in there. My uncle was in there. So for me, it's literally like watching a home film. They show the ferry. Greg can relate. He lived on the island for many years. He knew many of those characters. And they're truly characters. Like you'd be hard pressed to find actors that are better actors for those parts than the people they found that live on the island. So, for me, it was kind of surreal.
Yeah.
But the other cool thing was, my friends, nobody was in the water that summer. We would get unfettered access to the beach. People would be on the beach. I would get in the water. And we were like, this is awesome.
Opportunity knocks for young kids. Love it. Dave, what about yourself?
The first time I saw it was at the Steinbeck Theater on Cannery Row, like right when it came out. And kind of like Lisa, it was the first time I'd ever went back to see a movie again. I thought it was so cool. But I was already kind of hooked on sharks. I'd been hooked on sharks since I was 5 years old, and I was probably about 15 or 16 when I saw the movie the first time. And I grew up in the Monterey area, and so I was pretty into spearfishing. I was doing free diving, and they'd have shark attacks around there. And it was like, before Jaws, it was like a one-day story. Oh, a surfer got bit today, or a free diver got, and it'd just be, that would be it. It'd be over. But it was just, when I saw it, I thought it was really cool, but it was just kind of a monster movie to me. I just thought cause I was in the water, and I kind of realized years later that if you kind of grew up on the water and around the water and you weren't, sharks weren't as sort of scary as they were in Jaws. You just knew they were just part of the environment. If you went hiking in the woods, you might see a bear or something. That's kind of how, so it didn't have the impact, that you read at the time. But I will say, after Jaws came out, when there would be a shark, and we have a shark attacks every now and then in the area. After Jaws, every shark attack was a huge event. It was it'd be this huge, and you get guys would come down from the Bay Area or over from out of the area, and they'd go out in a boat. And that's where it got a little like Jaws, where there were people out there trying to catch a white shark that had maybe bit a surfer down, say the Big Sur coastline, and they're out off Monterey, off the Cannery Row, looking for a shark where there was an attack, say 30 miles away, but they're off Monterey, because that's where all the so TV stations would go out and film these nuts trying to catch a shark, and it was probably the funniest part I remember after the movie did come out. It was people. There were people who would do that, but they were never the locals. It was always somebody from out of the area would come down to the area to actually do that. So. So anyways, but it was definitely had an impact in the area, and you did see things like, I think in the movie they had like these little video games where the guys are shooting the sharks and stuff. You saw those things pop up around like Cannery Row and stuff, and I was just, but it was all tourist driven. They could, tourists would come down there and they put these little game things up there, and of course.
It's all I want to see.
Yeah, and of course, none of the tourists come down. We're going in the ocean at all that summer, so that was good for me because me and my friends were just going diving like we normally would and shooting a few fish, and I don't know how you guys were, but before Jaws, you really didn't have. I mean, this is obviously way before any of us were studying sharks. You had a very different. Was your impression of sharks sort of different than it is now? Like, if I see a white shark, I'll just do this or do that, versus prior to actually having seen one, what they could actually do. So, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I saw Jaws probably late 80s, like my first time seeing Jaws. I was 9 years old. I was in Florida. We were in a hotel room. I watched it with my dad. And I'll tell you, I didn't even want to go into a pool after that. I bought into the full thing. I didn't see it get made. The special effects weren't great, but to a 9-year-old in his imagination, I was like, nope, there's no way I'm going in the water for a while, until my dad made me go into the ocean, because he's like, you got to get over your fear. Then after that, I was fine. But it scared a heck of a lot of people, and it definitely affected a lot of people in terms of how they perceive sharks in general, not just white sharks, but sharks in general. Now, all of you have worked, throughout, decades after Jaws, and of course we could talk a little bit about the sequels. They weren't as good as the original, and different actors, like pretty big actors, maybe not at the time, but they were there. Like Dennis Quaid and Louis Gossett Jr. were in, I think it was Jaws 3D, I think it was, and Michael Caine was in the third Jaws Revenge. So it was definitely action packed, and a lot of people were into it. But from your perspective, and your evolution as shark scientists to today, like from then to today, what did you see in terms of, like, have you seen the perception of white sharks shift, or even just sharks in general? We'll start. Chris, you all of you have done sharks, like white sharks, but I know we've talked about white sharks recently with you as well. Let's start with you.
Yeah. So my perception shifted. Okay,
Right.
I hated white sharks. I thought they were totally overrated, prima donna sharks, right? And I swore I was never going to work on white sharks. That would be totally selling out. What the freak am I doing right now? I'm studying white sharks. Yeah, I know. I'm selling. The problem was I got to hold a baby white shark, and I swear to God, those are the cutest things ever. I'm telling you right now, they're the cutest things ever. And it was holding a baby white shark. I was like, okay, damn it, this thing's kind of cool. I might have to do this. So
what was it about that little tiny baby shark that made you?
It's like a perfect miniature version of the adult. I mean, they're just scaled down.
Right.
And then, of course, once you start learning about their physiology and all those things, you're just like, okay, this is kind of cool. Mako sharks are kind of like the tweakers, but white sharks are just calm and cool. And of all the sharks I've ever worked with, Greg, Lisa can probably attest to this. These things they're easy sharks to work with.
Right.
Compared to all the other species, they're actually kind of a dream. So it kind of defies the way people think of them, right? The way they were portrayed in Jaws. And I think for me, that was a surprise. And I think people's perceptions are changing because of all the work that we've been doing. I think people are looking at white sharks differently. It's Jaws, if it's in the water, it's going to come after you. And now, no, that's simply not true.
Right.
So, but think about it, that's 50 years to get to this point, right? I mean, it's crazy. The analogy I always use of whales, right? So if you went to where I grew up 150 years ago and you ask people about whales, they're like, those are horrible animals. They're
right.
demonic, they kill people. Whales are bad. They got a big makeover in the 70s, and literally overnight, people are like, we love whales. Okay, white sharks, 50 years, and we're finally starting to get there, but it's taken a long time.
They had sharper teeth than orcas, I guess.
But they've got a worse rap.
100%.
Did some damage for whales, but Jaws really that turned the corner for sharks.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say it changed a lot though too, because there's up until like the early '80s, all the funding was all about shark attack through the Office of Naval Research. And Chris, your advisor, your master, Don Nelson, that was kind of his sort of bread and butter for decades, wasn't it? Pretty much.
We did some crazy crap, right? all in the sake of saving people from sharks, right? All the chemical, electrical repellents, we would go out in the channel and bait in a bunch of blue sharks, and you'd have a mackerel in one hand and a squirt gun with soap in your other, and you squirt the soap in their mouth and see if they go away. And of course, 10 minutes later, they come back and want a mackerel. Or you shock them and you get shocked as bad as the shark would, and you'd be like, why are we doing that? So all that crazy stuff was to try to protect people from sharks. And here we are 50 years later, and we're like, how do we protect sharks from people? It's an interesting flip, right?
Yeah,
sure.
I think that's the other thing, that we went from that Jaws mentality of how do we protect people from sharks to how do we protect sharks from people.
Yeah,
for sure.
I was going to say, I'm going to give Greg Skomal's a book another plug here. It's Chasing Shadows. Get it? It actually, and I think I remember texting Greg when I first read the book. Is that the early part of that book I could really relate to, because I was all that stuff that Greg talks about at the time, early in his career, because it was kind of the early '80s when we were kind of really starting out. I could just relate to it. You talked about some of the people, like talking to John McCosker, who was at the California Academy of Sciences, and some of the stuff going on there. And at that same time out here in California, literally in the same timeline, I was talking to McCosker about, well, what do you think about, can you go out and get white sharks? And he's like, you're never going to see enough of them. They'll pop up here and there. You're just kind of, I was okay, but he actually got me onto 7-gill sharks, which is where I took off in my career. Yeah. But if you want to hear, but Greg did a great job, and I'll get a check later from Greg, but all I get, but I thought he did a really good job painting sort of that time frame when he was starting out and he was looking around where to go and study sharks. And a lot of the people you mentioned was almost like kind of reminiscing, like just, kind of parallel careers just on different coasts at that time. And of course, Lisa and I were in the same lab at the same time at Moss Landing Marine Laboratories. So that's a scary thought. Going to, what was, go ahead.
I think, obviously I actually start back in the 60s and 50s, and the only good shark's a dead shark. And we talk a lot about that history and the development and growth of shark tournaments, which were replacing, tuna and swordfish and marlin tournaments up in New England and Northeast. And the perception was clearly, the only good shark is a dead shark. But as Chris said and Dave, the perception of the public it has shifted. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we've gotten so much better at communicating with the public and educating the public. And the idea of a scientist doing something in his or her lab or in the field and then publishing it in a journal that nobody reads but other scientists, that's kind of over. And, the internet, social media, all those vectors have helped. And groups, conservation-based groups and such, the word's out and people are engaged. And I think that's really helped to turn, the way people are thinking about sharks.
Well, it also, if you look at it at the time that Jaws was out, we didn't know much about great white sharks. We know probably a little bit, but not even close to scratching the surface. But also their population was down too, compared to what it was today. It's Chris, I think you mentioned on one of the shows you were on, where now you look at the great white shark and it's a conservation success story. Since then, which you would think it would be the opposite after Jaws came out. And anyone could answer this, but when did we really start seeing the shift in an increase in population of great white sharks, either on the West Coast or on the East Coast? I guess which was first? Was it West Coast or East Coast? And then when did we really start to see that increase? Was it the West, Greg?
Yeah, I think Chris was one of the first people to start documenting that very well in some papers, looking at, I think, catch records in the gillnet fishery, perhaps, Chris. I'll let you talk about that. But that was before what we started seeing.
Yeah, I think, that was the shocking part for me, was looking at fishing records and seeing that change, right? Seeing numbers high and then numbers go down and then suddenly numbers start to go up and then going, that can't be. We're telling the public shark populations are decreasing. How can this be going up? And I had to do a lot of convincing of myself. I had to look at a lot of data to go, do I really believe this? And the great thing was, at the same time, Greg was doing all this work off Cape Cod, and I grew up there. All my time on the water, never saw a white shark. I talked to my grandfather, who's a commercial fisherman for 65 years.
Right.
I asked him, how many white sharks did you ever see in your life? He's like, maybe a few, but not, not very many. Now, in the summer, any day of the week, I can take somebody out and show them a white shark in Southern California. Pretty much any day of the year. Now, that's a whole different ball of wax. But
that's amazing.
If you'd asked me 20 years ago, would I be able to do that in California? I wouldn't have predicted this.
Even 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So 30 years after, right? After the movie. Well, now, was there a decline? Was anybody out there after the movie came out? Was there an increase in trying to fish for great whites or trying to kill them because of the movie?
Oh, yeah.
Lisa, do you remember anything?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, just to kind of follow up on something Greg said, and we were in the same project after I left the lab with Dave. Greg and I were in the same project for a few years. And that project started back in the 60s, and so did these tournaments. So the fishing didn't all start after Jaws, and the perception of sharks was formulated before Jaws and just kind of enhanced by
Right.
Jaws. And yes, the increase in shark tournaments, the increase in sport fishing for sharks definitely went up after Jaws and into the 80s. I think it peaked in the 80s and 90s. Correct me if I'm wrong, Greg. And now you hardly see, at least in the Northeast, a lot of the tournaments are gone for a variety of reasons, actually. But I do want to disagree a little bit with Chris in that I think the poor beagle babies are really way better than a white baby.
Okay.
Pork
All right,
chops.
fair enough. Well, beagle babies are cute. I'll admit that. Still won't work on them. Now, one thing, they actually deserve to be worked on. They're not those prima donna white sharks. I totally
Yeah,
agree.
exactly. I was the same way about white sharks. But you know what? Whether you like them or you don't like them, or you think there's too much research on them, you always want to go see them. And they're a really cool animal. Going out with Greg on the boat is, it's a highlight. So you can hate them all you want, but they're pretty cool.
And I would assume too, like, the all of a sudden the interest after Jaws on great whites, at some point led to the interest in other sharks like makos and blue sharks and all sorts, like hammerheads and all the different, like, did that like kind of like, was that the opening of the floodgates into let's start learning about other of the what we call here on like the iconic species of tigers and hammerheads and so forth?
Well, in the West. Go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead, Lisa.
Once the fishing really was ramping up, they saw that there were all kinds of other species that were coming up in the summer. Tigers, hammerheads, makos, whatever. And so, yeah, the interest in studying them, the interest in fishing for them. Tuna fishing can be very expensive, so people did shark fishing, which was less expensive and a little, more reliable at times. So, and that opens the floodgates for samples for us. And then we can study them and, increase that kind of awareness.
I was saying the West Coast, when Lisa and I were starting out, and Greg Kai was a professor, our advisor, professor, ichthyology professor at the time, a lot of the funding was all fisheries related on the West Coast. And a lot of it was mako sharks, thresher sharks, blue sharks to a point were being fished. Lisa got it. They started an angel shark fishery, which is what Lisa got onto. But what was interesting is a dirty little secret is that they had this white shark conference at Fullerton State in 1983.
Oh yeah.
and it was on white sharks. And Greg was like, "Hey, let's do an age and growth paper on white sharks." And so Lisa and I were literally like the two youngest people there. They ended up going to this thing at the time. And it's kind of funny now. If you look down at the publication that came out, it's like a who's who of shark in the shark world at the time. And but the white, even though it was on white sharks, and that was like, I think one of our first papers that Lisa and I did was on the white sharks. A little fact a lot of people don't know about us.
Yeah.
But I think the thing, and see what hear your take. Well, I think I know what your take is, Lisa, but that conference turned into an amazing networking event for both Lisa and I, because people like Jack Casey, Wes Pratt, Frank Carey, Leonard Campagno, Don Nelson. I mean, it was like a who's who of like, people in the legends in the shark field.
And that was when I met Jack and Wes and subsequently went to work for them and all that.
Yeah, and that was like, that's I met, I'd met Leonard, but I got to know Leonard at that conference there, and then that led to me eventually going on for Shelley Applegate was another one. And young people, if you don't know these names, you should look them up because they're all well-known legend in the field.
And Dave, and this kind of shows you something. When we did that paper, how many specimens? We had 13 specimens that we aged for that paper.
Yeah.
When Greg and I did our paper, we had upwards of 150 or something like that.
Yeah.
Greg?
Wow.
Yeah. And it took
So that
50
just shows
years
you
to
kind
get
of
that many.
years of
Yeah.
collecting, but
Actually-
also just an increase that we were seeing at
That-
the end.
That's the interesting thing about white sharks, right? So, Andrew, coming back to your original point, I think what happened was the juveniles were being caught in commercial fisheries. In California, they're being sold as shark. You can't, if I staked them out, you couldn't tell the difference between a mako and a white shark steak, right? So people were eating it, they didn't know it, but the adults couldn't really be caught in traditional fishing gear. So people actually had to deliberately go out and get them. And the reason why there weren't a lot of samples, especially big samples for them to work with, is there's no fishery for adult white sharks, right? So in California, there were incidents where a fisherman went out Farallones and killed 4 in a day, adults, right? But that's rare. So the reason why, this has kind of been this kind of slow thing is it's really juveniles that were impacted, that was drawing the population down. And of course you have fewer adults. So therefore, we still don't even have very much data on adults. Age and growth wise, you can't age something you can't count. So getting vertebrae from big adult females or things like that, you just don't get access to.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of that story. And of course, what happened with sharks and that popularity was, by 70s, NOAA was already fishing down a lot of other populations. So cod were gone, a lot of flatfish were gone. Fishermen were pissed because all they're catching is sharks. And NOAA's going, can we make these things valuable? Can people make a living off these? And they actually did market testing for shark meat, right?
And they pushed it.
Exactly. And it happened fast, right? So it went from, not a value to, oh, oops, maybe we overfished these things too fast. So it was at that time Jaws was coming out that was really starting to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I know. Say what Chris said there, and I know this from talking with Leonard Campagna, who grew up in San Francisco next to Chinatown. Shark fins, shark meats. It was very popular in the Chinese community, and a lot of it was exported at the time. And this was in the 40s and 50s and 60s. But like the fishing tournaments in New England, nobody said anything, nobody cared, nobody paid any attention to them. And I always tell people, I give talks like you guys do. It's like Jaws kind of brought this whole thing out of the shadows and into the public light, because it was going on and nobody paid any attention to it. And if there wouldn't have been Jaws, it might have eventually come to people's attention, but they were just catching sharks and nobody thought anything about it.
Well, one interesting thing that's going on now is now that the shark populations, not necessarily whites, but I'm talking sandbars, duskies, whatever, are coming back a little bit. There's a lot of pushback from the fishermen. They want to start fishing them hard again because they're getting their wahoo or their mahi bitten by a shark, and they're out for blood now. So it's kind of interesting because you get that cycle. Now we're getting back to, well, we want to kill these sharks.
Yeah, it's very similar to like the seal and sea lion population on both coasts, right? And everybody hated it when they were low population, and then when they made regulations to make them better, like the Marine Mammal Protection Act, all of a sudden they're like, well, hold on a second now, like maybe they're eating all our fish, so like maybe we should start hunting them. So it's always interesting. I wanted to just take a little bit. I know this is a great conversation, but I wanted to talk a little bit of these hot takes that I kind of looked up that people had. So the first one, and this goes to anybody who wants to talk about it, but was Jaws in the movie, like when you first watched it, and maybe now, I'm not sure if it's your perception has changed, was Jaws the villain or the victim? What would you say?
I thought it was just a monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought it was a monster.
It was the villain.
It was the villain?
Yeah.
I think he might have started
was a
out as
young
the
kid,
villain, but became the victim.
Yeah. I think it. Yeah. I definitely never sensed any. It was the victim at all at the time. It was just
at the time. But now, do you think it's the victim?
The shark in the movie is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Right.
If that
but wasn't
shark
it because it's
actually
something?
existed-
But it wasn't because humans like pissed it off, right? Essentially,
Well,
not the first one.
No, not
I would
this one.
say my students would be offended at them harpooning that shark. Like they would find that horrible.
Right.
That is just horrible.
Right.
Despite all the beginning part of the movie, right?
Yeah.
They would still find that offensive. So, I think that's that generation, right? We've seen
Right.
that generation
Right.
shift where they look at that and go, that's horrible.
Because the
right?
perception has changed too,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're
Exactly.
looking at
So
it with a
people are
different
far more
eye.
protective.
California. On the East Coast, has that changed, or is it no? That it's still a villain.
Yeah. I mean, no, the character in the film is a villain. There's nothing that shark does that I think gets sympathy. But sharks in general now are the victims. I think more so than villains.
Gotcha.
I have to say one thing from I don't know how you guys felt about this, but the first time I saw that and the white shark jumped in the back of the boat, I just thought there's just no. I mean, I didn't know any. I thought, no way. Everybody was like, no way. That could never happen.
No. Yeah, that's
Then cue air jaws. Then you're like, well, maybe that could happen.
Well-
Who knows?
I've told the story before. But the thing is, when I first went to South Africa in 1986, the people down there along the coastal area said, "Oh, these white sharks, they breach." And I thought, "Oh, you guys are full of shit." I said, "No way." and the guys that knew where to go, there was a few spots. They would go out there and they would do these like kite fishing, like fly this fish out here, and these freaking sharks are just white sharks, big ones, just come flying out of the water. And then I came back. I remember first time I came home from South Africa to visiting, I saw people like John McCosker and Bob Lee and Greg, the usual guy, and they thought like, okay, were you drunk or stoned? And I was like, no, seriously, these sharks can really jump out of the water. And it was amazing. And then, of course, years later, Chris Fallows started doing it and became, of course, rich and famous, which I just would have thought about when I was a grad student. But then I had these same guys who were saying, "Hey, Dave, did you ever see these white sharks in like South Africa breach?" And I was like, "Yeah, no shit. I told you like 5 years ago about this, and you guys thought I was drunk or stoned." So,
good stuff.
That's awesome. All right, the next one is it's shark movie fatigue. So some people think Jaws spawned too many inferior shark movies, leading to a wave of cheesy knockoffs that diluted the genre. So like Sharknado and things like that. Has there been a better movie than Jaws about sharks, like fictional, whether it be a horror, whether it be a thriller, in your opinion, has there been a better movie than Jaws on sharks that's not a documentary?
I would say no.
No,
Yeah, no.
I agree with Lisa.
I
yeah,
don't think so.
I mean,
Yeah.
Sharknado's damn good. Don't get me wrong.
I
Yeah.
love Sharknado.
I know. I
Very
love.
entertaining.
All 8 of them, or however many there are now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Too
I
many
know.
now,
It's like
but
I kept trying to pitch to get my lab in the movie, just to have one scene where the lab gets wiped out or something. I could have
Would you
retired
want to be
after
eaten
that.
by a shark?
Oh, I would only in the movie.
Oh, of
Yeah,
course,
exactly.
obviously.
yes,
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, I
here's
thought-
one. If this is for each of you, we'll go one by one. If you were in a movie about a shark that's eating people, what type of shark would you rather be eaten by? Like to be known for, just for fun, not for like gore or anything like that.
Go for a tiger.
Tiger?
Tiger.
Why is that?
I don't know. They've got. It would be pretty quick. I think they just
You don't
touch
wanna go
and have
quick.
you swallow you. They've got some big mouths there.
Yeah.
That's true.
Remember that
That's
one,
true.
Greg, on the vineyard?
Oh
That
yeah,
1,000-pounder? That could have swallowed me whole.
Oh, jeez.
both of us.
Yeah.
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 All right, Greg, what about you?
Smooth dogfish, maybe? No. A school of spiny dogfish tearing me apart like piranhas would be really funny. I think I'd like that. I mean, I'm just, it's
I'd
not
like
really
to see
happening
it.
to me, right?
No, it's not really happening. This is just a movie. This is just a
Yeah,
movie.
that'd be kind of fun. You're all coming at me. I'm fighting them off, and then they get me, Right down to
Awesome.
bones.
Right down to bones. All right, Chris, what about yourself?
Oh, I'd have to say cookie cutter.
Ooh.
Oh,
Right
yeah.
there, that's my biggest nightmare. Believe it or
Oh,
not.
yeah?
That's horrible.
Yeah, because those they only get 18 inches. Can you imagine if they got like
Oh, my
6
gosh.
feet?
Oh my
gosh.
God.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a cookie cutter anymore. They just
I
swallow you
mean,
whole.
you get melon balled to death, right? I mean,
so true.
Oh man.
Dave, what about you? Are you
Well-
looking at your like goblin shark or a chimera or something?
I'd have to say frilled shark, and I say frilled shark
Yeah.
because in one of the, I think it was a Sharknado 2 or 3, they had a frilled shark attack some guy, and then I thought, oh, that'd be pretty awesome.
That'd be good. I would say a goblin shark, because I feel like that's a good villain of a character. Yeah, it's got that cool jaw. Yeah,
for
sure.
Definitely got the alien jaws going. On that
and that
one.
would be the shot, right? Holding it by the neck while its jaws are coming out.
You're trying to grab it, and then
yeah.
the jaws come out. It's like a bit, it's like alien, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
One, Chris. Let's pitch that.
All right, here's one that's interesting. The economic impact. Did the film increase the tourism economy in Martha's Vineyard at the time?
Oh yeah.
Because did it get like an influx of tourists at the time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't that necessarily that summer. It was after. It definitely picked up, and that interest in sharks definitely picked up. So I think people recognize places that they saw in the movie, right? So the bridge, where the shark goes under, people recognize those places. So I think it was fun for people to go to the island and think, oh, this is where it all took place, and I can envision a shark swimming underneath the bridge or something like that. So I think it was a boon for the island.
Yeah.
Did you get out and do any, as a kid, do any tour guiding? Like say, hey, pay me like $10, I'll take you around and show you all the places.
No, but we would be the ones spearfishing underneath that bridge where nobody would go in the water. We used to jump off that bridge all the time, right? That was a fun thing to do. Yeah. And then we would spearfish under the bridge, and people would be like, "Oh my God, you crazy? The shark goes right underneath there."
You mean the mechanical shark in the movie?
They couldn't even get the mechanical shark through there.
But since I got to ask the question, I'm just kind of curious. Is that in that lagoon there where the shark was in? Is it tend to be a marine or more of a estuarine in that area?
Ask Dr. Skomal. He was doing scallop work, I think, at the time.
Okay. Yeah, I speared a lot of fish in that pond. It's a salt pond. It's
okay.
It's a tidal pond. It's a great producer of scallops and all kinds of shellfish, and flounder. Man, I nailed a lot of flounder in that pond. And they call that bridge Jaws Bridge.
Right?
I mean, people who come to the island and they love to jump off it, and it's popular. All the spots are.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have any, Greg, do you have any, when in New England, when you were growing up, did you ever have any encounters with any of the people from Jaws like Chris did at all?
As Chris mentioned, I actually met Chris on the Vineyard because I moved out there in 1987 and lived there for 23 years. And he left. He goes, I got to get the hell out of here. Like, what are you doing, man?
You went to Hawaii, didn't you? You're like, I'm going to go one island to
California
the other.
First.
California first. Right.
Yeah, so all the characters that Chris mentions, I met them, but they were older,
Right.
One of them is police chief now, and I think he just retired, actually.
He did.
Jonathan. And so, there's still characters. As a matter of fact, I'm going to the 50th anniversary celebration on the Vineyard in late June.
Nice.
Okay.
I'll be a guest there and give some talks and all that. It'll be fun. And they're going to bring some of the old, whatever actors are alive. I don't know who's left. Maybe Dreyfus.
Yeah.
Kramer's still kicking. Yeah.
A bunch of the production crew.
Okay.
That's awesome.
What about Ben Gardner? His widow still around, or is he...
That was another character. Oh my God!
Was it
Craig Kingsbury, who is that character? Oh my God, he was a selectman. He was He was crazy. Oh yeah, those are all true Islanders right there. Introduced skunks to the island. Did you know that, Craig?
Say again.
Craig Kingsbury, who is Ben Gardner, introduced skunks to Martha's Vineyard. Did you know that?
Oh, I didn't know Kingsbury did it. I heard a rumor that another person did it, but
supposedly it was Craig.
We'll just keep it amongst ourselves.
Yeah. Just between the five.
I want to hear more about that.
For people listening, if you're wondering who Ben Gardner is, you got to go watch the movie to find out.
Yes, absolutely.
Epic. That was probably the most scariest scene I thought when Ben Gardner popped up. literally
Yeah.
popped up.
I went to a Jaws Fest once years ago, and that head that they used in the
Yeah.
film was there, and I photographed it,
Oh,
and I
cool.
actually put it in one of my AES talks.
Yeah,
I don't
Nice.
know how I built it in, but I used Ben Gardner's head in one of my talks.
yeah. I think it was a talk you gave. We talked when they had that big white shark in the lagoon that was trapped.
That was it.
Oh,
that was
that
the
one.
I
talk.
think that was the one there because I remember it popped up in your talk there, and I was watching it. I was like, oh Jesus.
You need to try Ben Gardner's head. I think I used that line. Something like that.
I've definitely used that picture in my talks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Greg talking on the phone,
Oh,
big
that
white
one.
shark behind him, and he's going, "Has anybody seen a shark?
Yeah.
There's a shark in this
There's a
pond."
fin right behind me.
I think
I remember that, Chris.
I think we used that. I think we used that when we promoted Chris or Greg's episode on this podcast episode. I got a copy of that. It might have been from Chris or somebody. I got a copy of that, and I ended up. That's like the thumbnail for Greg's for Greg's thing. I think Chris, when your show, the thumbnail, we had a dual thing with Matt Hooper and with you, like with what's the actor's name again? The guy who played Hooper in there.
Richard
Dreyfuss, yeah.
Dreyfuss, yeah.
He's out there trying to tag the Jaws, and then there's Chris is like sitting there tagging this little like baby white shark.
Oh, man.
A little bit different, tagging in different eras. And I know I mentioned this before, but I'll just mention again. Like Leonard Capagno was my advisor for my PhD. He worked on the mechanical shark Bruce for the movie, and I know you guys all kind of knew Leonard to different degrees, and he was. I mean, trying to picture that guy he was eccentric, running around with Steven Spielberg for a couple of weeks down in Burbank working on the shark. Oh man, I'd loved to have been a fly on the wall for that.
Well, and the shark didn't work properly, right? I think, Chris, you mentioned that it was it was very problematic in terms of how it worked, right?
Yeah. Well, Leonard's role was just to make sure it looked like a white shark. They really wanted to make sure. And I don't know how you guys felt when I first saw the movie. I thought that shark looked pretty damn real to me. But I watch it now and I'm like, yeah, it looks like a mechanical shark. That's kind of.
I agree. No, at first, I mean, it was pretty good special effects for back then.
Oh, 100%.
50 years ago.
Well, I mean, that if you think about it, after that, didn't Spielberg do Star Wars after that, right? And
Yeah.
did they
77.
use this similar
Yeah.
special effects styles, right? In terms of obviously they didn't use a mechanical shark, but like different properties, but it's very similar.
Yeah, but I would argue that was the magic of the movie, right? The magic of the movie was Al Giddings failed in getting good underwater footage of white sharks. And all they had was the mechanical shark. So, and they didn't want to show it very often because it did look kind of fake. Most of the monster is made in your head, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Good
And the music. The music probably did. I think it's probably the most popular, shark identifying music. When people hear that, they know something's about to come up or something's coming from somewhere. But yeah, you're right. They didn't show it that often, but you knew, you feared it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was kind of good the way they kind of stealthily did it, and I think didn't they end up getting some of the footage from the Rod and Valerie Taylor shot it down in Australia was the stuff.
I thought so.
That was with Al Giddings, and the trip failed.
Oh,
They had horrible weather. They had a hard time finding sharks. They went out a bunch of times. They just had a hard time, and all they got were those few clips.
okay.
And then they shot all that stuff of the shark POV at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They shot that. So
And I was reading, that was like a new thing. Nobody had ever really done that before. And that really changed the game in terms of horror movies, apparently, is to have the sort of the killer, the monster POV to be like, okay, now we're seeing it from their point of view. And this makes it even scary. If you look at all the horror movies after that, the Halloweens, the Jasons, you almost like see it from there and it can be like a creepy feeling. So yeah, that was the first time that was ever done. So
Yeah,
that makes it interesting.
That era, some of the stuff, those movies like the Jaws movie and then the Star Wars that came out, those are like, at that time, like, I think Lisa said, like, you never went back to see a movie. You'd watch it once and that'd be it.
Yeah.
But those movies you wanted to go see again.
Indiana Jones.
Yeah, those were movies you wanted to go see again, which was up until that point was like unheard of. You'd want to actually go back and see the same movie at the time on that. And are they up to
keeping in mind you actually had to go to a theater. You couldn't just watch it on Netflix in your house. You had to pay.
Yeah, no, yeah, you had to, yeah. Well, it's been a long time. We'd pull money for like one guy to get in the movie theater because we didn't have any money. We're just kids, and one guy'd go in and go.
You go into your trunk.
Yeah, the drive-in. There'd be like one guy, and there'd be like six hiding in the back or something, or one guy would go in the theater and then he'd go to the back door, the emergency exit, and let everybody else in through the back door. It was the 70s. It was kind of
well. Speaking of Netflix and how movies have changed, like, do you find what? I guess the first question is, do you think that Jaws had a net benefit impact on sharks as opposed to sort of that negative outlook? Do you think it actually made it more positive just with your experience with working with sharks and how we understand sharks now? Or do you think it still had a net negative effect on sharks?
Well,
I think in the long term, I think it's been positive.
Right.
yeah.
I did a show once called How Jaws Changed the World, and I was interviewed in it, and maybe you guys did too. But they interviewed filmmakers, underwater photographers, all these people, boat builder, all these people who were inspired by Jaws.
Right.
They really emphasized that, and I think in the long term, it's been a positive.
Yeah, and I'd agree with the same thing. I always, like I said, I think people, a lot of stuff was the finning, the shark fishing were going on, but then sharks brought it out. And I think it made people more aware of it. And I think after the initial, that time where, the only good shark was a dead shark, it evolved into like people got curiosity about it. And so people started like asking a lot of questions. I mean, I think that's how I was always looking at, that's how the contemporary shark field today, the non-shark attack stuff really kind of grew out of Jaws because people asked a lot of questions, wanted to know like, how old do sharks get? Where do they live? How many are there? Where did they go?
I think a lot of people saw Matt Hooper and thought he was cool and started getting interested. And a lot of scientists came out of that movie, I think.
Yeah.
Exactly. I would agree with that. I think a lot of people got interested in science and being scientists.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for our generation, I think that was a big movie inspiration.
Well, here's a follow-up to that. I just, now we have, all these streaming sites and, CGI and special effects have gone to a place where, I mean, even AI, in on computers and on the internet have become so good. Do you think sharks would benefit from a remake of Jaws, since we're in such a state of remakes of everything, including Disney movies? Do you think that sharks would do better, or even research would be more invigorated by another Jaws movie? Or do you think it would actually have a more of a negative effect at this point in time?
Oh, I've been thinking about this.
Yeah.
I want to do a remake. And the reason is I think you could flip the script completely. So now with CGI, you can totally give people that perception of being the shark. So remember, there's only just a few seconds of that, right?
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this concept of my ancestors were whalers, right?
Right.
Can you imagine being a whale back in the early 1800s, mid 1800s, when everybody was hunting you? It'd be cool to do like a reverse Moby Dick, where it's from the whale's perspective. I think that would be kind of cool. It might flip the script in terms of how people think about the shark.
Yeah.
You could still make it a horror movie because it could be an evil white shark. But I think there's a lot of cool things you can do now that we couldn't do then. And I think, there's opportunities to do that and make it interesting, fun, or at least entertaining.
Yeah. I would say it'd be interesting. I'd say come up with a new script though. Don't try to rehash.
Don't remake it.
Because every time they try to reimagine the same freaking script, it's a disaster movie. Literally,
Jaws Gen Z. Gen Z Jaws.
But I mean,
minutes or 140 characters.
Yeah.
It's just on TikTok. That's all you scroll. Keep scrolling.
That's the attention span of most of the kids anyway. Yeah. So it's like, but not. I think the way you pose it, Chris, sound like it's really interesting. But my only thing would be just come up with a new script to just make it completely different, make it more contemporary. Don't try to take 50 years ago and then retell it. Don't retell the story. Come up with a new script, which I don't think they seem to do that very much in Hollywood. It's like, we'll just
No,
take the same
they go with
thing
what
and-
fits.
Yeah, they'll just do what fits, or you go over the top like the Sharknado movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Lisa, what, like if they did it, if they redid another Jaws, what science would you want to see in there that you think people should know about a great white or even another shark, another type of shark that you think that people would get a blast out of and you think they should know?
That's a good question, because the science I do, most people could care less about. It's not exciting to watch.
Except for the people in this room.
We believe it.
Well, but you could bring that in to a discussion when you're talking about the shark. They get this old, or they eat something besides license plates, or they have this many pups. You can bring that into the dialogue, and they kind of did that a little bit with Lorraine was reading Ellis's book. They tried to put in a little bit of knowledge on the shark in Jaws. So I think, putting in some of these things that we do know now that we didn't know before, to a degree, the age, the reproduction, this kind of thing, the migration routes, I think would be, easily done. But to put in like somebody reading a shark vertebra, I think would not do well for ratings. People
I don't know. You got CSI nowadays, right?
Well,
you can
that's
CSI
true.
the crap out of that, right?
I have a funny story along those lines.
Oh.
So 20 years ago, they were shooting a TV show in my lab called Shark Swarm. It was made for TV movie, right? And it was like John Snyder and the guy from Amadeus, real actors, right? And they were using my lab because it was a traditional shark lab. And the sharks were going crazy, and they had some brain disorder or something. So they had a mechanical shark in the lab, and they were filming in the lab, and they were talking about how they were going to kill these crazed sharks. And I was laughing while I'm in my office while they're filming, and I'm laughing. I'm like, this is like the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So they go cut, and they get the writers, and they say, can you spend like half an hour with our writers to try to help them science this up a bit? So they're talking about these guns that the underwater guns are going to use to stun the sharks. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So they were asking about just basic sensory biology. What do we know about the senses of sharks? How can you shock a shark or shoot a shark underwater? And after half an hour, I finally gave up. I'm like, forget it. These guys are like, no, none of those ideas will work. That's too sciencey. And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's basic science. That's all it is. You guys just need to put one ounce of science into this thing. They're like, nope, it's got to be more exciting than that. I'm like, okay. So it was just funny to watch, right? Whoever wrote the script clearly knew nothing about sharks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And even the producer and the director was like, I don't know if this works.
Yeah.
So it was that was my only delving into a movie making sort of experience. And wow, Lisa, they could really benefit from having you there.
Right.
Explain to them in basic terms. This is how a shark works.
I think if they wanted to make it more realistic, if you remember in the original Jaws, there's a point where the Roy Schneider character is talking to the Hooper character, and he's like, are you rich? And he goes, yeah. So I think to kind of make it realistic, you should have the Hooper character is like a homeless guy living in a tent who's got a PhD and postdoc in marine biology, and he just gets out of his homeless tent and goes down to the thing to go out to tag sharks, and he goes back to his homeless encampment just to put the realistic touch on the marine.
I just built a talk because of the 50th anniversary, debunking a lot of the film, and mostly showing what Matt Hooper got wrong, and I mean, from the species name to all these other elements, and I show the clip and then I tell the truth, and it really makes, unfortunately, Hooper look like an idiot, even though I say he inspired me to be a shark biologist.
Right.
But I think you could, if you did Jaws again, and like Lisa said, you could just correct all those mistakes Hooper made, and the audience would, make it accurate, and I think it would be, I think you can make it entertaining.
Yeah,
You still got to kill people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you gotta. It's got to be a horror movie.
Yes, you got to be over the. Well, I think that was the attraction of the whole Sharknado thing. Was it was so over the top
Yeah.
with people that you just. I mean, I have people. I've had people like maybe you guys have had the experience. They're like, how could you watch it? And I go, well, my lab gets together like every year, like has pizza and beer and watches Sharknado when it comes out. It's the most funniest thing we ever see.
It's an entertaining, and
Oh,
you
totally.
almost cheer for the sharks, like where they're going to end up, or I just think it was very well done. Very well done. For like a budget of like 60,000 or something like that. It was something ridiculous like that.
Well, the thing is, it's so over the top. It's campy. You just got to laugh at it. There's nothing in there that you're gonna take away seriously in the whole thing. On the thing, so one other thing I wanted to mention too. I thought all of us, when we started out, started doing sharks. We all worked on everything but pretty much white sharks, except for that little side tour Lisa and I had with white shark age and growth. I think I don't know what your feeling is, but it seems like today there's, because of social media, there's a lot more people that are focused on the big, like the white sharks, the tiger sharks, because they want to have that clip on their social media, and they've gotten away from where we all worked on different species in the 80s and 90s to now it's becoming more focused on just the big toothy sharks. Is that kind of your experience?
Isn't even that, Dave. Greg and I, we did age and growth. We just happened to do age and growth on sharks, which is the species we wanted to target. We were very lucky to make careers out of that. But we were really doing age and growth, reproduction. Nancy was doing food habits, migrations. Mm-hmm. It just happened to be on sharks, and all different species, whatever we had enough samples to work on. Right. I mean, I'm not like those guys. I don't work on white sharks, quote unquote, but I have done papers on white sharks with Greg. But I wouldn't say I work on white sharks, and so I totally agree with you. There's a totally different way of looking at things now. Yeah. And when I talk to the kids, I tell them, find something you like to do and do it on the sharks. And then you can also find a job and do it on something else when you can't find a job doing it on sharks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's more the skills. It's more the skill set the young people should be learning. The species is not going to be as important, but it just seems like there's been a shift away from whereas we had a lot of different species that we worked on when we were graduate students, and it seemed like there's just this kind of a bit of a shift away from it because of the appeal on how and you see I had mechanisms
as well.
Yeah, so I had a discussion with somebody here recently. I think it was on the AAS website about the people on social media. They see these pictures, these guys swimming up to tiger sharks, petting them on the nose, or swimming next to white sharks and hold the fin. I mean, that's just like an accident waiting to happen. And, the person in there might get away with it, but other people start, don't have any experience with sharks, think like, oh, I'm just going to go swim up to that tiger shark or that white shark.
Or even nurse sharks. People have been quote unquote bitten by nurse sharks.
Yeah.
Or sucked on, I guess. I don't know.
They get away with it till they don't. I mean,
right.
Exactly. Who is that? Ocean Ramsey. I mean, she sets a very poor example. And one of these days she's going to get her head bitten off. And,
Yeah. And if you had...
So Dave, it's kind of interesting because I just finished teaching my algebra biology class. And I end with conservation. And a lot of the students want to go into shark conservation, right? And I always ask them, what is conservation, right?
Yeah.
So, and the interesting thing is they go, I just want to be known for doing something that was important for conserving sharks. And then I go, well, you know what you could do? You could do age and growth, reproduction, or diet of some of these less known species. And they're like, but I'm not using cutting edge tools. You don't need to. All these stock assessments that tell us where a stock is, they're all listed as data deficient. Why?
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to do that anymore.
Right.
People need to do that because that's the only way we will know if the things we're doing are actually helping.
Yeah.
So these students all think today you have to be using the most cutting edge tool and it has to be fancy and expensive. And I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
Do you really want to make a difference?
It's the foundation.
Right.
You got to do the foundational information about the sharks.
I just tell them, find something that nobody else is doing anything on and become the expert on that species. That's, I mean, I think another thing too is like when we're all kind of started out in our careers, I mean, I know with Lisa and I, like when we were grad students, like we were like up to our elbows in like shark guts all the time doing necropsies. I mean, Lisa and I have talked about, I mean, I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of sharks and rays and stuff I've gone through, but I learned a hell of a lot.
Mhm.
And I know you guys did as well. And I don't think a lot of people do that these days. You know, you got to get like a IACUC, you got to get a whole bunch of permits to do whatever. And I think that I think they're losing out a lot in a lot of information, just basic biology that nobody else is getting. If you have that, you know, that's a real miss, I think. Yeah. No.
I agree.
Yeah. So.
Well, I'll tell you what, this has been amazing to be able to chat with all of you guys. Personally, for me, this is amazing. You guys are legends in the shark world, and I know a lot of people are gonna want to hear what you have to say about Jaws and just about, you know, the field, where it was, where it is now, and even just, you know, telling people to just do the sometimes the simple things to be able to get the research and get the knowledge on the different sharks and so forth. It doesn't always have to be what people think, quote unquote, as the sexy science that we all, you know and love and stuff, but just the foundational stuff needs to be done too. But this, I'll tell you, you know, when Dave and I started talking about this, when Dave suggested, I was like, this has got to happen, and you guys were on board right away. Really want to thank you, not only for coming on today, but you guys have been on the show multiple times. Really appreciate the support, and all the contributions you've made over time, including Dave. I mean, this is, like I said, this is surreal for me. So thank you so much for joining us. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you
Very well.
for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great to hang out with these guys. It's been
Yeah.
Fun to see
And
you
now
two
after I press stop, we'll talk even more, and then we'll be like, we should have recorded this.
Well,
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on today's episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. It was great to have this guest. As I mentioned at the end of this the interview, it's such an honor to be in the presence of this panel. You know, there's so many years amongst all of you of shark science, of fun stories that you've had together. Obviously, you've been friends for a long time, but being able to talk about Jaws at a point where some of you were there when the release of the movie, and then if not, watching it later on, and being part of shark research during that time, advancing. I mean, Dave, even you talking about, Lisa, in your first paper on aging and growth of white sharks. It's amazing just to see how far we've come and where everybody was at when you sort of like were part of that pioneering investigations and studies. It's just a lot of fun. Going back in time, what was this like? You know, reminiscing and on the stories of Jaws, as well as some of the fun stories that you all had together, you shared together. What was it like for you for this interview?
It was fun. We all kind of came up together. There's a few more people I could have added to the mix there, but we all kind of came up together. And as I say, Lisa and I literally we're in the same lab together at Moss Landing Marine Laboratories under Greg Kaye. And then Chris Lowe did his master's with Don Nelson. And then Greg Skomal worked with Jack Casey, who was involved in Lisa Natanson's PhD later on when she went to do her PhD. But it was just literally like a reminiscing down memory lane. And I give a shout out to Greg Skomal's book, Chasing Shadows, which talks about the early days there when follows his early career. And he really did a good job at capturing that era when you're kind of thinking, and something I've tried to mention too is like, it was such a dynamic time because like anything was possible, really. You could just literally, if you could think of an idea, you know, our professors and mentors were kind of like, sure, go try it. You know, they had literally, it was great because you don't often get that today.
It's like the wild, wild west of the ocean and shark science, right?
Literally it was. And we worked, you know, I look back too, we really at that time, we worked on all kinds of attacks. It wasn't just white sharks. We worked on a lot of different species, just a diversity of things as well. And of course, white sharks were part of them, but it wasn't like today where it seemed like every other person's working on white sharks to one degree or another.
Yeah.
So we had like, and the other thing to touch on too is there was no people today are very, you know, tuned into the whole conservation thing, but there was no field of conservation at the time.
Well, you didn't know any information on them, really, if you think about it, right? You need information for conservation.
It revolved around two areas. One was fisheries, and then another was just the general public's interest in like, well, how many shark species are there, and like how big do they get, and how many? Yeah, there's all those kind of basic questions that we had no answers to, And so it was kind of like just the whole field was just wide open for us at the time.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, we're definitely like, it was a really was a dynamic time for us. And all of us had a chance to meet some real, people that are very prominent in the field. Most of them have passed away now, but people like I mentioned a conference Lisa and I went to in Fullerton. We were just like literally like 22, 23 years old. And we met people like, Leonard Campagno and Don Nelson, and Jack Carey, Jack Casey, or Frank Carey and Jack Casey, and just a whole number of prominent guys that are big names in the field. There were big names in the field. And so young students like we were, it was great. And same with, Chris and Greg having that great opportunity. And then of course, having this podcast now that we can kind of riff back and forth about some of this stuff. Like I said, if you're a young person, you want to kind of hear what it was like from us. This was a great episode to listen to.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun to be a part of, and to watch you guys reminisce. It was a lot of fun. And to be able to talk about the big influence it had, good and bad, on sharks. And I think, we have a lot to thank for, a lot to be concerned about, but a lot to thank for, including like other shark horror movies that have come out in the past that have been like some of them that we liked, and some of them were like, maybe that's a little too far, a little too grotesque, or a little too against sharks. But regardless, it's a lot of fun. As I say this, have you seen the new one? There's a new, I think it's called, I forget what it's called, but it's a guy who kidnaps people and feeds them to the sharks, like kidnaps young people. And have you seen that trailer? It's all over the place.
Oh, I have not seen that one. I missed that one. I guess.
Oh, yeah. I forget what, I think it's called Dangerous Animals, but he basically brings them on his boat and kidnaps them. And this is a movie. It's fictional as far as I know. It looks it looks grotesque because they just use sharks as like crazy eating machines, but we'll see what happens.
I thought the one good thing came out of it was the whole Sharknado series, which I got to say.
Exactly.
I thought that was just and I think people that are not in the field, but like my lab.
Oh, they loved it.
We look forward to it. We'd have like, beer and pizza night and watch Sharknado. And it was phenomenal. My only disappointment was they never invited my lab to be on, have a cameo in one of the Sharknado series. That'd have been like my ultimate drop mic moment for my career. So
it's all about, it's all about the connections.
If anybody's listening out there that's connected to Sharknado, give me a shout. So
yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. That was awesome, Dave. Well, thank you so much. And everybody, Lisa, Greg, Chris, we appreciate you guys for joining us. It is awesome to have you on, and everybody else, let us know what your stories are about Jaws. Like when you first saw Jaws, what was your initial reaction? Did it help you, develop a love for sharks or fascination for sharks and interest for sharks? We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Hit us up on the On Jaws Pod, Instagram, or at Lost Shark Guy. And if people want to get a hold of you, or they could watch your series on YouTube.
Watch the series on
Lost
YouTube. If searching for Lost Shark on Lost Shark, the YouTube channel Lost Shark Guy.
And we'll link to it in the description. But other than that, we want to thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.